Good evening. I'd like to thank Ratio Christi for arranging our debate tonight and Kennesaw State University for hosting. Every day on the internet, I'm told that there's a battle raging with science and atheism on one side, united against the diabolical forces of religion on the other. The German physicist Max Planck saw things quite differently. Planck, who won the Nobel Prize in Physics for his work on quantum theory, said this: "Religion and natural science are fighting a joint battle in an incessant, never-relaxing crusade against skepticism and against dogmatism, against disbelief and against superstition. And the rallying cry in this crusade has always been and always will be, on to God." For Planck, religion and science stood together against the extreme positions of skepticism and disbelief to their left and dogmatism and superstition to their right. I'm glad to see that Planck's crusade continues here in the Peach State. I'd also like to thank Dr. Shermer for representing the forces of skepticism and disbelief this evening. I started reading Dr. Shermer's column in Scientific American back in 2002. The first installment I read was titled Shermer's Last Law. I finished reading it and thought to myself, brilliant, but wrong. Hope I get to debate this man one day and straighten him out. So thank you, Dr. Shermer, for making a 14-year dream come true. Now, on to God. There are dozens of arguments for the existence of God, but to keep things simple, I'll only be presenting one here in my opening statement. I'm somewhat reluctant to call theism a hypothesis because I think it functions differently from the way hypotheses typically function, but since theism is under investigation tonight, I'll call it a hypothesis for purposes of this debate. Treating theism as a hypothesis, my argument runs as follows. Premise 1. No hypothesis in history has more scientific confirmation than theism. As we'll see shortly, this is a tremendous understatement. Premise 2. No hypothesis in history has more scientific disconfirmation than atheism. This also is a tremendous understatement. Conclusion: if we have any respect whatsoever for science, we must accept theism and reject atheism. I call this argument the defibrillator because it's shocking and may lead to revival. To the untrained mind, of course, the defibrillator may sound absurd. Some people, after all, have been raised to believe that science can function apart from theism. It never occurs to them to question what they've been taught, and so they now believe by blind faith that God is not necessary for science. If you're one of those people, prepare to be defibrillated. To begin, we need to draw a distinction between ordinary scientific hypotheses, little s, little h, and the scientific hypothesis, capital S, capital H. Ordinary scientific hypotheses are tentative claims about the world, usually based on some sort of observation, claims that are confirmed or disconfirmed as relevant evidence comes in. A hypothesis becomes much stronger if you not only find lots of confirming evidence, but also discover why the hypothesis is correct. So you notice a piece of copper conducts electricity, and you put together a scientific hypothesis. All copper conducts electricity. Then you test your hypothesis by getting different pieces of copper and seeing if they too conduct electricity. You find that they do. This supports your hypothesis. Then you ask why copper conducts electricity, and you discover that free electrons in copper can move through the metal, and this makes copper a good conductor. There are tons of scientific hypotheses being tested around the globe, but all of these ordinary scientific hypotheses are ultimately derived from the scientific hypothesis, capital S, capital H. The scientific hypothesis is the hypothesis on which science as we know it rests. There are three key elements of the scientific hypothesis. 1, the universe can be understood. 2, we can understand it. And 3, it's good for us to understand it. If you don't believe that the universe is, at bottom, rational, you're not going to spend years of your life gathering data to figure out its laws. If you don't believe that human beings are capable of understanding the universe, why waste your time trying? If you don't believe that it's good to understand the universe, why would you want to? So, intelligibility, the universe can be understood. Capability, we can understand it. And desirability, we want to understand it. These are the three key elements of the scientific hypothesis, and all three have to be in place for science to get off the ground. In the 21st century, we take the scientific hypothesis for granted. We believe that the universe can be understood, that we're the kinds of things that can understand it, and that it's good for us to understand it. But there was a time when the vast majority of people didn't believe these things. They didn't believe that the universe could be understood, or that we could understand it, or that it was good to understand it. And so, even though there were some scientific achievements among the ancient Greeks and the Egyptians and the Chinese and the Muslims, there was never anything that would amount to a revolution in our way of thinking about the world. But in the 16th and 17th centuries, a group of devout atheists decided to uncover the secrets of the universe, and these atheists produced an explosion of scientific research in the budding fields of astronomy, physics, chemistry, and biology. Oh, did I say atheists? I meant Christians. They were all Christians. Here we might wonder, why did these Christians dedicate their lives to understanding the universe? Let's ask them, and we'll allow them to answer from their own writings. It's time for Q&A with the pioneers of the scientific revolution. Here goes. First question. Nicholas Copernicus, the publication of your book on the revolutions of the heavenly spheres generally marks the beginning of the scientific revolution. What were you thinking when you started this revolution? Copernicus's actual response. To know the mighty works of God, to comprehend his wisdom and majesty and power, to appreciate in degree the wonderful workings of his laws, surely all this must be a pleasing and acceptable mode of worship to the Most High, to whom ignorance cannot be more gratifying than knowledge. Now that's odd. Sounds like his scientific research was grounded in his religious beliefs. He thought he was worshiping God by studying the universe. I guess we should ignore him and move on. Tycho Brahe, you spent decades recording astronomical data, and your measurements were 5 times more accurate than the best measurements available before you. Why did you spend so much time studying the stars? Brahe's response, those who study the stars have God for a teacher. Studying the stars because you want to learn from God. How weird is that? Galileo Galilei, you're called the father of modern observational astronomy. Why did you decide to give birth to modern observational astronomy? Galileo's response, I do not feel obliged to believe that the same God who has endowed us with sense, reason, and intellect has intended us to forego their use. When I reflect on so many profoundly marvelous things that persons have grasped, sought, and done, I recognize even more clearly that human intelligence is a work of God and one of the most excellent. Johannes Kepler, you sifted through astronomical data year after year in order to come up with your 3 laws of planetary motion. Why did you do it? Kepler's response, our piety is the deeper, the greater is our awareness of creation and its grandeur. Since we astronomers are priests of the highest God in regard to the book of nature, it befits us to be thoughtful, not of the glory of our minds, but rather above all else of the glory of God. René Descartes, you wrote early texts on optics, anatomy, and psychology, but you're also the father of modern philosophy and the master of methodic doubt. Surely you can cast doubt on all this talk about God. Descartes' response, I see plainly that the certainty and truth of all knowledge depends uniquely on my awareness of the true God, to such an extent that I was incapable of perfect knowledge about anything else until I became aware of him. Blaise Pascal, mathematician, physicist, philosopher, inventor, pioneer of probability theory. Aren't all these other scientists being unreasonable? Pascal's response, there are 2 kinds of people one can call reasonable. Those who serve God with all their heart because they know him, and those who seek him with all their heart because they do not know him. Robert Boyle, father of modern chemistry, pioneer of the experimental method in science. What drove your research? Boyle's response, The vastness, beauty, and orderliness of heavenly bodies, the excellent structure of animals and plants and other phenomena of nature justly induce an intelligent, unprejudiced observer to conclude a supreme, powerful, just, and good author. In the book of nature, as in a well-contrived romance, the parts have such a connection and relation to one another, and the things we would discover are so darkly and incompletely knowable by those that precede them, that the mind is never satisfied until it comes to the end of the book. Antony von Leeuwenhoek, father of microbiology, you constructed such amazing microscopes that you were the first scientist to observe and describe microorganisms. Why did you want to see what eyes had never seen? Leeuwenhoek's response: it is to be hoped that the inquirers into nature's works, by searching deeper and deeper into her hidden mysteries, will more and more place the discoveries of the truth before the eyes of all, so as to produce aversion to the errors of former times, which all those who love the truth ought diligently to aim at. For we cannot in any manner better glorify the Lord and Creator of the universe than that in all things, how small forever they appear to our naked eyes, which have yet received the gift of life and power of increase, we contemplate the display of his omniscience and perfections with the utmost admiration. Isaac Newton, physicist, co-discoverer of calculus, considered by many to be the greatest scientist in history. Your laws of universal gravitation and motion provided the grand synthesis that concluded the scientific revolution. Tell us what you think of atheism. Newton's response: atheism is so senseless and odious to mankind that it never had many professors. You seeing a pattern? The scientists of the scientific revolution would roll over in their graves if they heard a bunch of 18-year-old atheists claiming to be champions of science just because they follow Richard Dawkins on Twitter. So why were Christians the pioneers of the scientific revolution? Here, our atheist friends often insist that it was just dumb luck. Anyone could have done it. And if Europe had been filled with atheists, it would have happened even faster. But this is sheer nonsense. There were cultures and civilizations around the world. Plenty of people had the opportunity to study astronomy and physics and chemistry and biology. But these branches of science all took off at roughly the same time in one particular civilization. It only makes sense that we should ask, why? The problem is that when we ask the people who did it why, they immediately start talking about their belief that the universe was created by a rational being, and that since human beings were created in the image of this rational being, we can understand the universe, and that by setting out to understand it, we're worshiping God. As for atheists thinking that they could have come up with science without Christians doing it for them, let's take a quick trip to planet reality. Atheists would have been the last people to ever start a scientific revolution. Why is that? Well, anyone can do science now, because we all accept the scientific hypothesis. We all believe that the universe can be understood, that we're the kinds of things that can understand it, and that it's good for us to understand it. But the pioneers of the scientific revolution already believed these things before they set out to prove them. They believed them based on their theology. They came up with a method of proving them, and that method became the scientific method. Now, if you were an atheist before the scientific revolution, would you have any reason to think that the universe is governed by neat little mathematical equations? Of course not. It wouldn't make any sense to say that a falling rock is going to obey an equation. Rock doesn't have a will, can't obey anything, so intelligibility goes out the window. What about capability? If you were an atheist before the scientific revolution, why would you think that human beings are capable of figuring out the laws of nature? Even if you happen to think that there were laws of nature, which as an atheist I doubt you would, why would you think that you could discover them? You're not made for that sort of thing. You're not made for anything. You'd have no idea how you got here and no reason to think that you're capable of figuring out how you got there. So you'd be trapped in a kind of bubble with no escape. How about desirability? Supposing, for the sake of argument, that you believed that there were laws of nature, which, again, I don't think you would, and that you believed that human beings could discover these laws, which, again, I don't think you would, why would you want to? I understand seeking knowledge that has some practical benefit, like growing better crops or building an air conditioner, but from an atheistic perspective, what's the point of seeking knowledge that has no practical benefit? So the three key elements of the scientific hypothesis make absolutely no sense given atheism, but all three make perfect sense from a Christian perspective. Long before the scientific revolution, in the universities of Europe, which, oddly enough, were founded by Christians, medieval philosophers and theologians laid the groundwork for science, even before the universities were formed. Augustine said, "Let the Bible be a book for you so that you may hear it. Let the sphere of the world be a book for you that you may see it." Augustine tells us to read the book of nature. Recall Kepler declaring that astronomers are priests of the highest regard, priests of the highest God in regard to the book of nature. And Boyle comparing the universe to a romance novel that you can't stop reading until you reach the end. Thomas Aquinas argued, since human beings are said to be in the image of God by virtue of their having a nature that includes an intellect, such a nature is most in the image of God in virtue of being most able to imitate God. Only in rational creatures is there found a likeness of God, which counts as an image. As far as a likeness of the divine nature is concerned, rational creatures seem somehow to attain a representation of that type in virtue of imitating God, not only in this, that he is and lives, but especially in this, that he understands. We are created in the image of God. One of the main features of this image is that we have an intellect and we reflect God's understanding when we understand. Medieval theologians also emphasize the correspondence between our cognitive faculties, our reasoning ability and so on, and the world. We're made to be able to understand the world. So out of theism, particularly Christian theism, flowed a set of ideas about the universe, about human beings, and about the goodness of knowledge. These ideas permeated Christian civilization. In the 16th and 17th centuries, Christians developed a way of confirming these ideas scientifically. How do you confirm the scientific hypothesis? By testing lots of ordinary scientific hypotheses in different fields. Every ordinary scientific hypothesis that's tested, whether it's confirmed or disconfirmed, is confirmation of the scientific hypothesis. In other words, whenever you test an ordinary scientific hypothesis, you're confirming that the universe can be understood, that we're the kinds of things that can understand it, and that it's good to understand it. But the scientific hypothesis is a set of ideas that flowed directly from Christian theism, ideas that are indefensible given atheism. Moreover, when scientists investigated the world, they eventually found further confirmation of theism, such as the beginning of the universe out of nothing, the fine-tuning of the cosmos for life, and so on. Now, if every scientific hypothesis that's ever been tested is confirmation of a set of ideas that flowed directly from Christian theism, and if the testing of these hypotheses led to even further confirmation of theism, what can we say? We can say that no hypothesis in history has more scientific confirmation than theism. But we can go even further. Since every scientific hypothesis that's ever been tested is confirmation of the scientific hypothesis, and as we've seen, all three of the key elements of the scientific hypothesis are fundamentally at odds with atheism, we can say that every scientific hypothesis that's ever been tested is disconfirmation of atheism. And if every scientific hypothesis that's ever been tested is disconfirmation of atheism, it's clear that no hypothesis in history has more scientific disconfirmation than atheism. The only conclusion to draw from all this is that if we have any respect whatsoever for science, we must accept theism and reject atheism. And so, echoing Sir Francis Bacon, one of the great pioneers of the scientific method, we can say that A little science inclines man's mind to atheism, but depth in science brings men's mind to religion.